So you will be getting to see me throughout the event today. So I'm going to focus on just one or two slides here today and get us back on track time-wise. I would like to say that the extent of my French consists of bonjour, merci, au revoir, et où est la toilette? So I will be doing my presentation in English. Okay. My name is Andrew Aitken. I'm managing partner of Alliance Group. I'm a personal advisor to firms such as Sugar CRM, Funambule, .NET Nuke, Actuate, and our firm is the leading open source business and strategy consulting firm. And over the last almost 9 years, we've completed 400 engagements for a variety of very large customers such as IBM and HP and Microsoft, and a whole host of smaller software companies. Okay, it worked. So again, I'm going to go through a couple of these slides very quickly, but I want to touch upon as the theme of this event is open source at the heart of the digital recovery. My presentation is going to focus on the business and commerce of open source. And for me, the commerce of open source started during the tech bubble, the burst, in the early 2000s. At that time, everybody wanted to have the biggest, fattest sunbox they could with running Solaris. But after the bubble burst, people had to find a more economical way of running their software. And so they turned to more commodity boxes, Dell running Linux on using clustered software. And for me, that's when the business of open source really started. If you fast forward a few years, our firm does a lot of work with the investor community, with venture capitalists. And during 2005, 2006, all you had to do was sprinkle the terms open source here and there throughout your presentation and your executive summary and your pitch deck, and there was a good chance that you would get a check from the VCs. Things have dramatically changed in the last few years. Today, now, it is not good enough to simply tell the investors you're an open source company. You must have a differentiated value. Recently, we saw that Bonitosoft, who I believe is here today, received a round of funding. First, they had to prove that they were a viable business process management software that was enabled by an open source model behind it. So what's changed is it's not good enough to be an open source company today. Today, you must prove yourself through your business value proposition, and then you must demonstrate that that business and value proposition is enabled or enhanced by a software model. I think I've got it. I think we've begun to see some consolidation in the industry, and I think between the 06 and 09, those are the years of the mega merger, starting with JBoss and with Zend and Zimbra, and most recently Spring. These are very, very, very large acquisitions. I think we're entering a time starting last year when we're going to see numerous smaller acquisitions of open source companies. I'm predicting that we'll see 20 to 30 acquisitions per year for the next 2, 3, 4 years. And it's going to consist of companies like .NET Nuke, which acquired a small competitor called Snowcover. It's companies like Wavemaker in the open source AJAX and RI rich internet application development space that acquired a couple of small AJAX consulting companies. So we're going to see a lot of smaller open source companies being acquired, and we're going to see a tremendous amount of industry consolidation in the next 2 to 3 years. And it's also important to understand, and I think our practice reflects this, for every one open source company that we work with 3 to 4 proprietary software companies that are moving to open source. So it's important to keep in mind that, yes, there are more and more open source companies every day, but many of them are proprietary software companies that are trying to understand or migrate their model from proprietary software to open source software. This is the slide that I'd like to spend just a minute or two on and reflect on Matt's theme of the battle being won or lost around open source. And between open source and proprietary. To me, that is not necessarily the battle that exists today. The battle exists. The concern that I have is that due to social, political, and economic factors, that open source as an industry, as a segment, is beginning to fragment. What we're seeing is that you have government organizations that are creating their own hosting platforms for their preferred open source applications. And although I'm a very, very patriotic American, I don't know that I want to go to forge.mil to get my open source software. There are other factors at play here. Today, it's important that if you're a commercial open source vendor, that you begin to create an ecosystem around your software, and you want to recruit as many partners and developers and customers to your own ecosystem. That's why we're seeing Forge.OpenBravo. That's why we're seeing SugarForge. Every commercial vendor is developing their own Forge to attract and build their own ecosystem, increase their own footprint. And each one of these activities in and of themselves is worthwhile and worthy and very important to those organizations. But what we risk is having an industry that begins to fragment, to have silos of open source here and silos of open source there. And the challenge is that if you're an end user and you're beginning to consider deploying open source, you don't necessarily know today where to go to find the best open source. You don't know what the alternatives are. It gets very complicated. If you're a developer looking to participate in the open source community, how do you pick a project to get engaged in? How do you know what the breadth of opportunities exist out there today? And so I think this is going to continue for some period of time as open source matures and as the commercial viability of open source grows. We're going to see more and more of this fragmentation, and this is an issue that is of real concern to me. And my last slide, for those of you who are considering building or growing an open source company, these are 3 questions that you must be able to answer yes to if you're going to build a business around open source. Do you have a product that actually solves a problem that people are willing to pay for? If you don't, open source is not going to change that. Do you have the ability to draw a community to you? Do you have the ability to identify developers and reach out to them and bring them to you and keep them engaged with you? And then lastly, do you have the resources and the commitment and the ability to be your own community and drive your own community for at least 12 months or more? So these are 3 most fundamental questions that you need to be asking yourself if you're going to be building an open source business.
Thank you very much, Andrew.